I still remember the sound the wagon made when the road gave out beneath us. It was not much of a road to begin with, only two muddy tracks cut through scrub and stone, but even that little trace of other people vanished before noon. After that, there was only forest. Pine after pine, standing dark and tall on either side of us, their tops moving against a gray sky, while the river flashed now and then through the trees like a strip of cold metal. The deeper we went, the quieter the world became. No church bell, no dog barking from a yard, no voices carrying over a field. Only the creak of the wheels, the tired snort of the mule, and the steady knock of my own thoughts that would not leave me alone. My wife, Sarah, sat beside the flour sacks with our youngest girl asleep against her shoulder, and the little boys wrapped in a blanket near her knees. Ethan walked most of the way instead of riding. He was old enough to take the weight off the mule, he said, and proud enough not to complain, though I saw the red marks the wagon handle had left on his hands each time he helped guide it over roots and ruts. He was 16 then, lean and strong, with the same dark eyes his mother had, only steadier. He looked ahead more than he looked back. I think now he was the only one among us who truly believed we would find something worth all that leaving. We had not come to the river forest because we were brave. We had come because the years behind us had used us up. The rented ground had failed too many seasons in a row. First, the drought, then the sickness through the hogs, then the debt that grew while the crops did not. Every town mile seemed filled with men ready to tell you what kind of fool you were, and women willing to look at your children with that quiet pity that burns worse than scorn. I could bear hunger easier than that look. I could bear cold easier than hearing my family spoken of, as if we were already ruined beyond repair. So, when I heard from a trapper about riverland far north, deep pine country no one wanted because it was too remote and too stubborn for easy farming, I let the thought get into me. By the time spring had passed, it had become a decision. We sold what little could be sold. We left behind what could not be carried. In the end, all we truly owned was an axe with a worn hickory handle, a wagon with one wheel bound in iron by a blacksmith who knew we could not pay full price, a few sacks of flour, a kettle, 2 blankets, my tools, Sarah's Bible, and the hands God had given us. That was all. That and Ethan. The trapper's directions had been rough, but they proved true enough. Near sundown on the 4th day, we found the place, a bend in the river where the bank rose just high enough to stay dry. Thick pine on 3 sides, birch nearer the water. A game trail cutting through brush, and not far from the bank, half hidden under old boughs and weather-blackened poles, the remains of a hunter's lean-to. I remember climbing down from the wagon and standing still for a long moment. The shelter was hardly more than a slanted roof of rotting logs and bark, open on one side, the ground beneath it bare and damp. One corner had sunk. Moss clung to the lower timber. A man alone might have spent a few nights in it and moved on. A family could not have lived there unless they meant to die slowly. Sarah looked at it and said nothing. That worried me more than if she had cried. The boys stared with wide eyes. Our little girl had woken and begun to whimper from the cold. Ethan walked around the lean-to once, pressed a hand to one post, then looked at the trees around us. "We can fix it enough for tonight," he said. Not we might, not maybe, we can. That was Ethan. He had a way of speaking that made work sound halfway done already. So we went at it before the light failed. I cut saplings while Ethan dragged deadfall from the tree line. Sarah gathered pine boughs and kept the younger ones close, setting them to carry fist-sized stones and armfuls of dry needles. We braced the sagging side with green poles, laid branches thick along the open gap, and hung a blanket to break the wind. Ethan stripped bark and stuffed it into the cracks where the old logs had pulled apart. I dug at the earth with the back of the axe and found clay enough to smear into the worst openings. By dark, my hands were numb, my shoulders shaking with weariness, and the shelter still looked poor enough to shame a man. But it no longer looked abandoned. It looked claimed. That first fire would not take easily. The wood was damp, and the wind slid in low under the hanging blanket, scattering sparks and smoke back into our faces. The boys coughed. Sarah turned away so the little girl would not breathe the worst of it. Ethan crouched beside me, breaking thinner sticks across his knee, feeding them one by one until a flame finally rose steady in the hollow of stones we had made. The firelight touched his face, and for the first time since morning, I felt something close to hope. We ate dry flour cakes, scorched on the kettle lid, and drank river water that tasted of iron and leaves. The children fell asleep almost where they sat. Sarah tucked them together under both blankets and rested one hand on our daughter's hair, as if making sure she was still there. Outside, the pines moved in the darkness with a sound like deep breathing. I did not sleep much that night. Every cry of some distant creature reached the lean-to clear as a warning. Every gust through the trees seemed to say we had come too far to turn back, and not far enough to survive. I kept seeing the empty fields we had left behind, then the faces of my children in the firelight, then the river beyond the trees, black and silent and cold. Around midnight, I rose and stepped outside. The stars were sharp above the clearing. The wagon stood crooked where we had left it. The mule slept with one hind leg bent. And Ethan was awake too, sitting on a stump with his coat around his shoulders, the axe resting across his knees. "You should sleep," I told him. He glanced toward the lean-to. "So should you." For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then I looked out into the dark timber and spoke the thought I had kept from all of them since we left. "I don't know if I've done right bringing you here." Ethan lowered his eyes to the axe handle, rubbing his thumb over the worn place where my hand had smoothed it over years of work. "There wasn't anything for us back there," he said. "At least here there's a chance." A chance. It was a small word to build a life on, but that first night in the pine forest, it was enough to keep me standing. Morning came, pale and bitter cold, and with it, the real beginning of our life in the woods.